Our relationship, I think at that point, things were coming down on us pretty hard, and we started to take care of each other a lot more.
Yeah. We did 72 of those.
There are moments in television history that nobody planned, nobody approved, and nobody could take back. Most of them got buried, taped over, locked in a vault somewhere, and forgotten. But every once in a while, one slips through, right past the censors, past the directors, past the executives sitting in their offices convinced they had total control over what America could and could not see. And when that happens, the moment doesn't just survive. It becomes legend. September 17th, 1967. A Sunday night. Millions of American families settled into their living rooms, adjusted their television sets, and tuned into the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour on CBS. What they were about to witness was supposed to be a musical performance. A rock band. Some noise, some energy, the kind of thing the show had become known for booking when every other program on television wouldn't dare. But what actually happened that night, what the cameras captured, what the editors missed, what CBS couldn't scrub from the tape before it went out, that was something else entirely. That was the kind of moment that changes people. The kind that gets talked about for decades. This is the story of that blooper, of the chaos that produced it, of the network that tried to control everything and the brothers who refused to let them, and of a single scene that, when you look at it again, really look at it, tells you everything you need to know about what the Smothers Brothers were actually doing on American television. To understand why that September night mattered so much, you have to understand what the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour actually was and what it was up against. Tom and Dick Smothers didn't come for privilege. Their father, Major Thomas B. Smothers Jr., was a United States Army officer captured by Japanese forces during World War II. He survived the Bataan Death March, one of the most brutal episodes of the entire war, only to be transferred later to a prison camp in Japan. In April of 1945, with the war nearly over, he was moved again, this time from Fukuoka to Korea. He never arrived. Some accounts say he was buried at sea. Others say he was cremated in Korea. Of the 110 men transferred alongside him, only 36 survived. Major Smothers was the last to die. Tom was not yet 8 years old. Dick was barely 7. Their mother, Ruth, raised them alone in California, working long hours to keep the family going. That early hardship, the grief, the instability, the sense that the world could pull the rug out from under you without warning, lived inside both brothers. It showed up later in their comedy. Beneath every joke was something that bit. Beneath every laugh was a truth that didn't quite let you go. The comedy itself started almost accidentally. Tom had formed a folk music group in college called the Casual Quintet. Dick learned bass just to join him. When the other members drifted away, the two brothers kept performing. They began filling the silence between songs with banter, teasing each other, arguing in front of the audience, letting the real friction of their brotherly relationship spill out under the stage lights. Audiences didn't just laugh. They recognized something genuine. Tom played the innocent one, the one who could never quite keep up. Dick played the put-upon serious brother, forever exasperated. Tom's line, "Mom always liked you best," became their trademark. It wasn't a written joke. It was just the truth delivered with a smile. By 1959, they were performing at the Purple Onion in San Francisco. They were booked for 2 weeks. They stayed for 36. Within a few years, they had records, television appearances, and a reputation as something different. Sharp, self-aware, funny in a way that also made you think. CBS came calling in 1967 for a specific reason. The network was getting crushed on Sunday nights by NBC's Bonanza, which was pulling a quarter of all American television viewers. CBS had tried everything. Nothing worked. They needed something bold. They needed someone who could bring in a younger crowd. The generation that was marching in the streets, listening to folk music and rock and roll, and increasingly skeptical of everything television had offered them so far. Tom and Dick Smothers fit that description. And Tom, who understood exactly what leverage he had, negotiated for something almost unheard of at the time. Creative control. CBS, desperate enough to agree, gave it to them. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour premiered on February 5th, 1967. Within 2 weeks, It had beaten Bonanza in the ratings. Not by a little. Convincingly. Younger viewers tuned in. Advertisers noticed. CBS executives who had been crossing their fingers suddenly found themselves with the hottest show on television and almost immediately began regretting the deal they had made to get it. From nearly the first episode, CBS and the Smothers brothers were at war. Tom pushed. The network pushed back. Then Tom pushed harder. They invited Pete Seeger, a folk singer who had been effectively blacklisted from American television for nearly 17 years because of his political views and his anti-war stance. They booked Jefferson Airplane, The Doors, Buffalo Springfield, acts that mainstream variety television wouldn't go near. They made jokes about President Lyndon Johnson so pointed that Johnson himself reportedly stayed up until 3 a.m. to call CBS and demand they be reined in. When Nixon followed Johnson into office, the pressure didn't ease. It intensified. Every script went to CBS censors for review. Every word was examined. Every guest was vetted. Every joke about Vietnam. Every lyric with a political edge. Every sketch that dared to suggest the government might not be entirely honest. All of it was subject to cutting, altering, or outright removal. The writers, a young group that included Steve Martin, Rob Reiner, and a Canadian named Lorne Michaels who would go on to create Saturday Night Live, felt like they were writing with scissors already poised over their work. They called it death by 1,000 cuts. They weren't being dramatic. Tom and Dick responded the way people respond when their voice is being taken away. They got creative about it. They delivered tapes as late as possible, sometimes submitting a clean version for review and then slipping in last-minute changes before air. They made the censorship itself the subject of comedy. Tom once performed a sketch in which he played a censor, gleefully chopping up scripts with oversized scissors and cutting performers off mid-sentence until nothing was left on screen but silence. CBS refused to air it. The network didn't see the irony in censoring a sketch about censorship. Or perhaps they did, and that was exactly why they pulled it. Joan Baez came on the show and tried to dedicate a song to her husband David Harris, who was going to prison for refusing the Vietnam draft. CBS cut most of what she said. When Harry Belafonte performed Lord, Don't Stop the Carnival, while footage played of police beating anti-war protesters at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, CBS pulled the entire segment. Then, in a move that staggered even the show's writers, the network sold the 5 minutes of airtime they had cut to the Republican Party for campaign advertising. The slot that had been meant for a protest against political violence became an ad for the politicians being protested. Nobody at CBS seemed to register the grotesqueness of that. Or if they did, they didn't care. The show kept going. It kept fighting. And the acts kept coming. By the fall of 1967, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour had established itself as the most dangerous hour on American television. It was the show where things happened, where the unexpected showed up and the network scrambled to contain it. But nothing quite prepared anyone for what happened on September 17th. The Who were booked to perform My Generation. If you knew anything about The Who in 1967, you knew this was not a band that showed up, played their song, and went home quietly. Pete Townsend windmilled his arm across guitar strings with the force of someone trying to knock a wall down. Roger Daltrey swung his microphone like a weapon. John Entwistle stood perfectly still and somehow made that seem like the most menacing thing on stage. And Keith Moon did not play drums so much as assault them, as though the kit had personally offended him and he intended to make it pay. Moon had decided, without telling anyone, not the show's producers, not CBS, not even his own bandmates, to pack his kick drum with explosives. Not a small amount, a significant amount, more than anyone had agreed to, more than anyone had anticipated, more than the studio, the crew, the audience, or the television cameras had been prepared for in any way. When the final moments of My Generation arrived and the pyrotechnics detonated, the result was not a theatrical flourish. It was an explosion. Smoke poured across the stage. Debris flew in multiple directions. A piece of a cymbal struck Moon himself, knocking him backward off his stool. Pete Townsend, standing close enough to feel the full force of the blast, had his hair blown upward in a wild mess. but that was the least of what the explosion did to him. The concussive force caused hearing damage that would never fully heal. In later years, Townsend would describe the constant ringing, the difficulty of playing guitar when you can no longer fully trust what you hear, the way that single moment in a CBS television studio changed his relationship with music for the rest of his life. The damage to his hearing was eventually estimated at nearly 90% loss in one ear. The audience, which had been loud and energetic throughout the performance, went momentarily silent. That silence, the kind that happens when the human brain is trying to catch up with something it wasn't prepared to process, lasted only a few seconds before it broke into screaming and cheering. But in those few seconds, you can feel something on the tape. You can feel the room recalibrating. And then, amid the smoke and confusion, Townsend did something that nobody scripted and nobody stopped. He grabbed Tom Smothers' acoustic guitar, the one that had been sitting on a stand near the stage, and smashed it. Tom Smothers, who had just watched a bomb go off on his television show, stood there and stared. There was nothing to say. There was no appropriate response. The moment was already beyond anything the television rulebook had prepared anyone for. Here is the part that gets overlooked when people tell this story, and it is the part that matters most when you look at the footage again with fresh eyes. CBS had strict protocols. Every second of the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour was reviewed. Every frame was subject to the network's editorial control. Censors watched the broadcasts, flagged problems, and in many cases intervened before anything controversial could reach the public. The system wasn't perfect, but it was thorough. It was designed to catch things. It didn't catch everything that night. In the chaos of the explosion, in the smoke and the noise and the scramble to figure out what had just happened, the cameras kept rolling. Directors kept cutting. And somewhere in the background of the frame, in a moment that nobody in the control room flagged, that no censor pulled, that no executive noticed until it was already out, something appeared. Something that had been deliberately obscured all season. Something the show had been hinting at and dancing around and encoding in sketch names and hippie characters and jokes about roaches that nobody thought were about bugs.